Today, we will be covering 3 unbelievable cases of people discovered in extremely bizarre places that will leave you absolutely speechless. If you enjoy true crime, mysteries, and true stories, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Now let's get into it. The first story we are going to be covering today is that of Sandile Sibia. It is never a particularly fun experience to break or sprain a limb. Of course, the most painful part of breaking an arm or a leg is the pain from the break itself, but the second most painful part is admittedly the trip to the hospital to get the break taken care of. Waiting in sitting rooms can feel like forever. Getting an X-ray can take far longer than one would like, and the actual process of having an injury put in a cast can be both tedious and uncomfortable. These were likely the thoughts that Sandile Sibia was having on May 10th, 2019, when he accidentally hurt his right leg and realized that a trip to the hospital was in order. Sandile, a construction worker and local of Durban, South Africa, ended up heading to Durban's Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Hospital in the early afternoon in quite a bit of pain. When he arrived, he predictably waited his turn in the hospital sitting room like any other prospective patient. After what felt like an excessive waiting period, Sandile was finally seen by a doctor and ultimately taken in for an X-ray. His X-ray came back showing that he had a broken femur and that he would definitely need further medical treatment. At the time, the staff at Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Hospital had instructed Sandile to stay overnight for a few days until he could be properly treated. In fact, Sandile was set to be transferred to another nearby facility, Addington Hospital, to see a proper orthopedic doctor for his cast application. That is, if he made it that long. When the time came for Sandile's transfer, hospital staff approached the injured man's room with his paperwork in tow, but when they entered, Sandile Sibia was nowhere to be found. Hospital staff immediately set out in search across the facility for Sandile, assuming that he could not have gotten very far with a severely injured leg. After checking on every floor of the building and looking into every other patient's room, the staff was dumbfounded at the notion that Sandile seemed to have vanished into thin air. But how could a man with a very obviously broken leg have made it all the way out of a secure hospital building? Sandile's disappearance appeared to make no sense to anyone working in Mahatma Gandhi Memorial, so staff were quick to report the man officially missing to local authorities. The South African Police Department opened a missing persons case immediately for Sandile, and authorities across Durban set out on a small-scale search for him. Unfortunately, despite search efforts, not a single person could locate any sign of Sandile. A variety of theories arose surrounding Sandile's mysterious disappearance, but none sounded feasible and no one had any information to work with to determine why Sandile would have gone missing in the first place. Back at the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Hospital, staff could not help but be incredibly concerned for Sandile's well-being. They were meant to help treat his right femur and he somehow managed to disappear right under their noses. And perhaps that is exactly where they should have checked. Ultimately, it was the smell that gave it away. According to KZN Health, Mek Nomagugu Simelane Zulu, on May 24, 2019, just 10 days after Sandile had originally come into the hospital, something was terribly wrong. Nomagugu stated, quote, "An unbearable stench intensified at the hospital, and eventually it led to the storeroom where fluid dropping from the ceiling provided the telltale signs that something was amiss." As the stench began to spread throughout the entirety of the hospital building, hospital staff decided to investigate its source themselves. What they found completely shocked them. When hospital staff finally stumbled upon the storeroom that the horrid smell was emanating from, they cautiously pushed up against the ceiling tiles. When they lifted their flashlights into the space to have a look around, they came face to face with a decomposing body, the body of Sandile Sibia. When the Gandhi Memorial Hospital staff reported the discovered body to local police and positively identified him as the man who had mysteriously disappeared from the hospital almost 2 weeks before, questions arose surrounding the context of Sandile's death. Sandile, despite his broken femur, was an incredibly healthy 53-year-old man who was more than capable of taking care of himself. So how did he end up dead in a hospital ceiling? The hospital itself assured local citizens and police personnel that their facility had impeccably tight security measures in place, with security guards in every unit of the hospital grounds. In fact, they even asserted that the only way runaway patients would be able to slip past security within the hospital grounds is if they were to change into civilian clothing during the busiest parts of the hospital's visiting hours. And yet, Sandile was found decomposing inside the ceiling of a room only accessible to hospital staff. When the investigation into Sandile's disappearance and subsequent death began, many officials believed that Sandile had actually been one of the hospital's mentally ill patients. In fact, earlier reports of Sandile's initial discovery even went so far as to report that Sandile had actually been a mental patient before his disappearance, which was eventually proved to be false by the hospital. Throughout the investigation, officials were adamant that they would take the strongest possible action should anyone be found guilty of any form of wrongdoing. Despite this, Sandile's death still remains a mystery, and the way his body ended up in the ceiling panels of the very same hospital he came to for help just days before his death is also still completely unknown. The second bizarre case we have for you today is that of Brian Egg. Brian Egg was born and raised in San Francisco and spent the majority of the later years of his life living in San Francisco's South of Market or SoMa neighborhood. After having spent some of his youth working as a bartender at the legendary gay bar, The Stud, Brian's family resided just outside of the SoMa neighborhood and visited with Brian every so often when their respective schedules lined up properly. When visiting each other was not particularly feasible, Brian and his brother would simply give each other a call to stay in touch, maintaining their close relationship through regular communication. That was until Brian's brother noticed a lack of regular contact from Brian and began to worry about his siblings' whereabouts. Brian's brother made multiple attempts to contact him over the phone, but to no avail, which made him even more concerned. Eventually, after receiving no response from Brian for several weeks, Brian's brother decided to visit Brian's apartment to check on his well-being. When Brian's brother arrived at Brian's South of Market apartment building, he immediately noticed that Brian's apartment was eerily silent and appeared to be locked up tight. Upon arriving at the apartment door, Brian's brother noticed that there was no response to his knocks and calls, so he decided to contact the apartment building management to request access to Brian's apartment. Eventually, with the help of building management, Brian's brother was able to enter the apartment and conduct a search. When Brian's brother opened the door to Brian's apartment, he was immediately met with a terrible smell. The smell was so awful that he felt it was impossible to ignore and thus searched the apartment with the utmost urgency. It was not long before Brian's brother discovered that the terrible odor was coming from the refrigerator. When he opened the refrigerator door, he was horrified to discover that the terrible smell was emanating from a human body, which was later identified as Brian himself. The discovery of Brian Egg's body inside his refrigerator sent shockwaves through his community. Brian's family and friends were left stunned and confused as to how or why he had ended up in such a bizarre situation. As the investigation began, San Francisco police questioned the building management and several of Brian's acquaintances to determine what might have happened. Eventually, police uncovered the details of Brian's life that shed some light on his mysterious death. Brian's body had apparently been in the refrigerator for a considerable period of time before it was discovered, and the investigation revealed that Brian had actually died of natural causes. The precise cause of death was later determined to be heart disease. Though it was later determined that Brian's death was due to natural causes, the reasons behind his choice to store his body in the refrigerator remained unclear. Ultimately, Brian Egg's unusual death left many questions unanswered, and his tragic demise continues to baffle both his loved ones and investigators to this day. And now, the third and final story of today's video. We'll be covering the strange case of Derek Gillingwater. Derek Gillingwater was a 27-year-old man living in the small town of Beatrice, Nebraska. Beatrice was known for being a quiet and peaceful community, and Derek was a well-liked and respected member of the town's social circle. One day, Derek went missing under mysterious circumstances, and his family, friends and local authorities immediately began searching for him. Despite their best efforts, Derek was nowhere to be found, and there were no leads to help locate him. Months later, a shocking discovery was made when Derek's body was found in a completely unexpected place. Derek had been discovered inside the air conditioning unit of an abandoned building on the outskirts of Beatrice. The discovery of Derek's body in such an unusual location raised many questions about how he had ended up there, and why no one had been able to locate him previously. The investigation revealed that Derek had somehow managed to get himself into the air conditioning unit, but how and why he ended up in such a confined space remained a mystery. The case of Derek Gillingwater is one of the most perplexing and baffling cases in recent memory, leaving many unanswered questions and a lingering sense of unease. And that wraps up today's video on these three incredibly bizarre and unsettling cases. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.